Hello everyone, welcome to Michigan Man MTG, and we're back with more spoilers. Today we got spoilers from Avatar The Last Airbender, so we got about 20 cards to go through from the set. But before we dive into the previews and our first look at Avatar The Last Airbender, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Avatar The Last Airbender preview season and beyond. Alright, so let's dive into the previews. So we've seen actually Avatar Aang before. So he is a 4-mana human avatar ally, legendary creature. Mana cost is in red, green, white, and blue. He's a 4/4 with flying and firebending. And firebending, what that means is when you attack, you get that much mana. So when Aang attacks, you get 2 red mana. That does not go away at the end of steps. So also, whenever you waterbend, earthbend, firebend, or airbend, you get to draw a card. So every turn, you're going to be drawing a card with Aang. Then if you've done all 4 this turn, you get to transform Avatar Aang. And then you get Aang, Master of Elements. Again, a legendary creature, Avatar Ally, who's a 6/6 with flying. And spells you cast cost a white, a blue, a black, a red, and a green mana less to cast. So very powerful ability on the Master of Elements side. And at the beginning of each upkeep, you may transform Aang, Master of Elements. If you do, you gain 4 life, draw 4 cards, put 4+1/+1 counters on him, and he deals 4 damage to each opponent. So if you're transforming him back, I don't think that people will necessarily do that all the time, but it's a very powerful ability to gain 4 life, draw 4 cards, get 4+1/+1 counters, and then deal 4 damage to each opponent. So I think this is going to be, one of the most powerful cards from the set. The 4 unique mana color cost is what's going to probably limit its playability in Standard, though, but it's going to be a very strong commander card. Alright, next we've got Appa, Steadfast Guardian for 2 and 2 white mana. You get a legendary creature that's a Bison ally. He's a 3/4 with flash and flying. And when Appa enters, airbend any number of other target non-land permanents you control, exile them. While each one is exiled, its owner may cast it for 2 rather than its mana cost. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, create a 1/1 white ally creature token. So Appa is basically, your opponent is going to board wipe you. You play Appa, you go ahead and remove all your creatures from the game temporarily, and then for 2 mana, you get to recast each of them. So I think a very powerful ability on Appa, because we do have a lot of board wipes in Standard right now, and this is a way to kind of get around those board wipes. So I like this card, and I think it's definitely got Standard playability. Next, we've got Katara, the Fearless, for a green, a white, and a blue mana. You can legendary creature that's a human warrior ally, and is a 3/3. And if a triggered ability of an ally you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So nice, if we've got allies that are going to have consistent triggered abilities, Katara makes sense in that kind of deck. And then we also have Katara, Water Tribe's Hope, for 2, a white, and 2 blue mana. You get a legendary creature that's, again, a human warrior ally, and is a 3/3 with vigilance. And when Katara enters the battlefield, you get to create a 1/1 white ally creature token. And then her waterbending ability is for X. Creatures you control have base power and toughness XX until end of turn. X cannot be 0. Activate only during your turn. And while paying a waterbending cost, you can tap your artifacts and creatures to help. Each one pays 1 mana. So I think this is, based on what I'm seeing, that our waterbending ability is you're going to pay mana and then you're going to get a benefit. And in this case, all your creatures' power and toughness is going to improve, which I think is a very powerful ability in Standard. If you've got kind of a go wide strategy and then you've got Katara out, you've got 5 mana, probably because you paid 5 mana to get Katara out. And because of that, you're likely to make all your creatures base power and toughness 5/5, and that's a lot to deal with from the opponent's side of the board. So I think this has definitely a chance to see play in an Azorius deck. Next, we've got Sokka, Bold Boomeranger for a blue and a red mana. You legendary creature that's a human warrior ally. He's a 1/1, and whenever Sokka enters the battlefield, you get to discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. So that discard and draw ability that we see on red cards. And whenever you cast an artifact or lesson spell, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Sokka. So obviously Sokka's meant to go in an artifact deck where you're casting artifacts pretty consistently, and as the game goes on, you get to grow Sokka. Now, we've seen cards like this in the past. Sometimes they're really good, sometimes they're not, so we'll have to kind of see where Sokka ends up. Next, we've got Toph, the first Metal Bender for 1, a red, a green, and a white mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human ally warrior. 3/3. Non-token artifacts you control are lands in addition to their other types. They don't gain the ability to tap for mana. So they're going to be lands. So that fact that they're going to be lands actually has some relevance. Because at the beginning of your end step, you get to Earthbend 2. Target land you control becomes a 0/0 creature with haste. That's still a land. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. When it dies or is exiled, return it to the battlefield tapped. So that's a really powerful ability. The Earthbending ability, it's just, hey, you're not putting any mana into anything. Your artifacts are becoming lands, so that's going to make them harder to get rid of from the battlefield. And once you've Earthbended, and now that is a 0/0 creature with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, then it's going to be even more difficult to get rid of that card. So I think Toph has a chance to be a very good card in Standard. Next, we've got Firelord Zuko for a red, a white, and a black mana. You legendary creature that's a human noble ally, and is a 2/4 with Firebending X, where X is Firelord Zuko's power. And whenever this creature attacks, you get to add X red mana. This mana lasts until end of combat. So it's a short window on this firebending ability. So basically during your combat step, you're going to be able to go ahead and have some extra mana to do things with during your combat step. So we'll have to see if there's going to be payoff specifically where you can utilize this mana with this firebending ability. And then whenever you cast a spell from exile, and whenever a permanent you control enters from exile, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So looking at the ability we saw on Appa, Appa comes in, exiles a bunch of stuff, and then you can play those later for 2 mana. And we also have a lot of other ways in red to exile cards and then play them later. So I think, in that style of deck, Firelord Zuko could be a very, very powerful creature in Standard. Alright, next we've got Momo, Friendly Flyer for a white mana. You legendary creature that's a lemur bat ally. It's a 1/1 with flying, and the first non-lemur creature spell with flying you cast during each of your turns costs 1 less to cast. So really nice ability on Momo, where if you're building this in a flyers deck, you're going to reduce the cost of your flyers when you cast your first flying spell each turn. And whenever another creature you control with flying enters the battlefield, Momo gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So there's that potential to make him 2/2 or a 3/3, depending on the number of creatures you're going to bring into play on a given turn that have flying. So I think it's a potential card that you could maybe build around a little bit with a flying deck that's white based. Next, we've got Fated Firepower for X and 3 red mana. You get an enchantment with flash. And this is where that firebending magic could be really important. This enchantment enters with X fire counters on it. If a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus an amount of damage equal to the number of fire counters on this enchantment. So, you're playing a deck where you're going to be firebending regularly. So during combat, you flash this in, you put 2 or 3 extra counters on it, and those counters then are going to increase that damage that you're dealing, by a few more, and that may just be the difference in winning and losing the game. So I'm excited to see how this card works, given that we know that red is going to be able to generate extra mana during its combat step. Next, we've got Yue, the Moon Spirit. For 3 and a blue mana, you get a legendary creature that's a spirit ally and a 3/3 with flying and vigilance. And Yue has also water bending for 5 mana. You may cast a non-creature spell from your hand without paying its mana cost. While paying a water bending cost, you again may tap your artifacts and creatures to help. Each one pays for 1 mana. So the card that I'm most worried about with Yue is Omniscience. Now, this is a 5 mana way to put Omniscience into play. And if you're playing, a number of creatures and artifacts as a part of that deck, well, you can just have them and it's going to reduce the cost of those. So I think this potentially could be very busted in the right deck, where you've got a lot of either high-cost enchantments, high-cost artifacts that Yue can then bring into play. Next, we've got Rise of Sozin. For 4 and 2 black mana, you get a Saga, and as the Saga enters, and after you draw your draw step, you add a lore counter. First, on Chapter 1, you get Destroy All Creatures, so 6 mana, black enchantment that destroys all creatures. On Chapter 2, you get to choose a card name, search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards with that name, and exile them. Then that player shuffles their library. And then on Chapter 3, exile the Saga, return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. And when you do, you get Fire Lord Sozin, legendary creature that's a human noble, and a 5/5 with menace and firebending of 3. So whenever this creature attacks, you get to add 3 red mana to your mana pool, and this mana lasts until the end of combat. So going back to the enchantment we just talked about, this is another way to get that red mana you need, or mana you need, to put that into play with multiple counters on it, so you're adding that additional damage when you're attacking. And whenever Fire Lord Sozin deals combat damage to a player, you may pay X. When you do, put any number of target creature cards with total mana value of X or less from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So an incredibly powerful ability on Fire Lord Sozin. So this is the kind of card that I feel like people are going to try to sneak into play. Destroys everything. You get to take away the best card in your opponent's deck, and then once it's transformed and you can attack with it, then you're going to be able to take the best creatures out of your opponent's graveyard and play them for the mana that you're going to generate through your firebending ability and any other mana that you've got. So potentially a very, very powerful mythic rare. All right, now we've got Aang's Iceberg. For 2 and a white mana, you get an enchantment with flash, and whenever this enchantment enters, exile up to 1 other target non-land permanent until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. Okay, so very typical, banishing light ability on this. The thing that is going to push this over the top is that it has flash, so that means you can play that on your opponent's turn. And we've had cards like Seal Away that have done this in the past, and they're very popular cards because being able to cast an enchantment like this on your opponent's turn, can be backbreaking at times. And your opponent probably is going to know that you have this, so that's going to make them try to play around it, which kind of helps your game plan. So I really like Aang's Iceberg. I think it's going to be a staple card in white decks. Now, it also has water bending for 3 mana. Sacrifice this enchantment. If you do, scry 2. So I don't think that ability is necessarily very relevant, but if when you cast this, the non-land permanent you're exiling is a token, then okay, well, I can get rid of this later, get the advantage of scrying, and that's a decent ability in the mid to late game when the effect of water bending, which means sacrificing in this case, isn't going to be really negative for you. All right, let's move on to another rare for the day. We got our first lesson card, and this is Redirect Lightning for a red mana. It's an instant and a lesson. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you either pay 5 life or pay 2 mana. And what the spell allows you to do is change the target spell or ability with a single target. So very powerful spell here, where you're going to be able to change the target of a spell your opponent's casting. Maybe they're playing a card draw spell, and you play this, and now you're drawing the cards instead of your opponent is drawing those cards. So I think this is a lesson that is going to see play. And our lessons are cards that we can play in our sideboard that we, through other cards, we're going to be able to get out of our sideboard and bring them into your hand. So when we had this during the Strixhaven set, it was a very powerful ability, and there were a number of lessons that saw quite a bit of play. So I would think that the lessons we're going to see in Avatar: The Last Airbender are going to be powerful as well. Next, we've got some lower rarity cards for the day, so I'm going to go through these quickly. The first is Aang's Journey, which is a sorcery and a lesson for 2 mana, and it has kicker of 2. Search your library for a basic land card. If the spell was kicked, instead search your library for a basic land card and a shrine card. Reveal those cards, put them into your hand, and then shuffle. So 2 mana, colorless way to go ahead and get a basic land, which is a quality ability in standard at the common level, and you also gain 2 life, so certainly a playable lesson. Next, we've got Avatar Enthusiast for 2 and a white mana. You get Human Peasant Ally. That's a 2/2, and whenever another ally you control enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Probably more of a limited card, but if we do have a lot of allies in the set, then it might have some standard relevance. Next, we've got Southern Air Temple for 3 and a white mana. You get Legendary Enchantment. That's a shrine and is an uncommon. And when Southern Air Temple enters the battlefield, put X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of shrines you control. So the minimum is going to be a +1/+1 counter on all of your creatures when this comes into play. And then whenever another shrine you control enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So this is going to be stacking potentially +1/+1 counters onto your creatures. So I think this, in a deck that's dedicated to getting +1/+1 counters on your cards, I think has a chance to see standard play. Next, we've got Saku's Haiku for 3 and 2 blue mana. You get an instant, that's again a lesson. You get to counter target spell, draw a card, then mill 3 cards, and then untap target land. So a lot going on there. 5 mana is a lot for the lesson, but in a control deck, it might see play there. Alright, moving on to some additional cards from the set. First, we've got Fire Nation Attacks for 4 and a red mana. You get an instant where you get to create 2/2 red soldier creature tokens with firebending of 1. And whenever a creature with firebending attacks, okay, you get to add 1 mana. This mana lasts until the end of combat. Again, we saw that with Firelord Sozin, and with Firelord Zuko, that ability. So I think, probably this isn't standard playable, but in limited, if you've got those cards, it's probably a good combination to get that extra mana you want. And it also has flashback for 8 and a red mana. Next, we have another lesson, and it's Earthbending lesson for 3 and a green mana. You get to Earthbend 4, so target land you control becomes a 0/0 creature and with haste. That's still a land, and you get to put 4 +1/+1 counters on it. When it dies or is exiled, return it to the battlefield, tapped. So, a good lesson in a deck where we've got, earth bending, we're trying to turn our lands into creatures. So I think it's got some playability because of that. Certainly, probably will be a good limited card. All right, and those are our previews from Avatar: The Last Airbenders. First look. So I think we've got a lot of interesting cards in the set so far. And I think the interesting thing that we saw is we kind of now have an idea of what all the bending abilities are going to do. And because of that, I think this is going to be, at least from a design standpoint, an interesting set to play. I like that we're seeing the return of lessons. And I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is going to be an interesting set for us to play when it gets here at the end of the year. So thanks for staying to the end of the video, and remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Avatar: The Last Airbender, preview season, and beyond. Thanks. I'll see you in the next one.